Imagine yourself as a 17-year-old girl in medieval London, the year 1512. At 4 in the morning, you are awakened not by dawn, but by a man twice your age, forcing himself upon your frail, diseased body. He reeks of ale and months of unwashed flesh. Your skin bears the telltale lesions of the French disease. Though 6 months pregnant, you dare not refuse his demands, for pregnant women still owe their daily rent. This was a typical Tuesday morning in the life of Elizabeth. For 4 centuries, the Bishop of Winchester operated what was arguably Europe's most extensive system of sanctioned sexual exploitation. Young women paid ecclesiastical taxes for the privilege of selling their bodies. They faced substantial fines for expressing pain too audibly, endured diseases that consumed them from within, and served customers who regarded them as nothing more than disposable commodities. History knew them as the Winchester Geese. What follows is the most comprehensive account ever assembled of their daily existence, hour by hour, customer by customer. We shall examine the men who purchased their services, the diseases that destroyed their bodies, and the systematic brutality that operated under divine blessing. Medieval life was harsh, but what these women endured transcends anything you might imagine. To comprehend the true horror of their existence, we must follow Elizabeth through a complete day in 1512, for her experience was replicated thousands of times across 4 centuries. At 4 in the morning, Elizabeth awakens to Thomas, a married merchant who pays a premium for what he terms dawn visits. Despite having 3 children and a wife of 30, whom he considers too aged for his desires, Thomas specifically seeks out teenage girls bearing visible signs of disease. Medieval customers demonstrated no concern whatsoever for the women's physical condition or consent. Once payment was rendered, these women became temporary property, no different than purchasing bread or ale. Thomas completes his transaction within minutes, deposits his 3 pennies upon the wooden crate that serves as Elizabeth's table, and departs without acknowledgement. Elizabeth remains motionless, bleeding and struggling not to move too rapidly, as sudden movements trigger severe dizziness. The French disease has been systematically destroying her nervous system for 2 years. Even simple actions like standing require careful calculation. 2 hours later, Brother Martin arrives for the mandatory weekly health inspection. The church required an actual monk to examine these women's genitals for signs of disease, a practice they termed maintaining standards, though in reality it constituted systematic medical humiliation. Brother Martin compels Elizabeth to disrobe completely, despite her pregnancy making the examination particularly degrading. Using unwashed hands, he inspects her genital area for evidence of gonorrhea, the French disease, or what they called the burning sickness. His examination confirms what both parties already know. Elizabeth's French disease has progressed to the secondary stage, open sores covering her vulva, mouth, and hands. In our modern era, this would necessitate immediate hospitalization. In 1512, it resulted in a 5-shilling fine for the offense of working while diseased. Here lies the cruel paradox. Elizabeth cannot afford to cease working. The fine, combined with her daily rent and meal costs, means she must earn at least 8 shillings merely to break even. Diseased women command lower prices, forcing her to accommodate 12 to 15 customers to avoid deeper indebtedness. Brother Martin meticulously records her deteriorating condition in his ledger, the same document the bishop reviews weekly to calculate his profits. Elizabeth's progressive illness represents merely a line item in an ecclesiastical business plan. At 8 in the morning, breakfast consists of gruel prepared from flour, water, and whatever scraps the brothel owner acquired most cheaply. Often bulked with sawdust to increase volume, this meager fare proves difficult for Elizabeth to retain. The French disease has spread to her digestive system, making eating painful and vomiting frequent. She attempts to cleanse herself using a shared bucket of cold water unchanged since morning. Soap constitutes an additional expense. Privacy remains non-existent, as 3 other women share this cramped space. Time for proper ablutions is limited as customers begin arriving early. Elizabeth's working attire consists of a thin woolen dress, deliberately designed for rapid removal. Undergarments are forbidden as they impede transaction speed. Footwear is similarly prohibited. Customers complain about removal delays. During winter months, women literally freeze between encounters. By 10 in the morning, the day's commerce begins in earnest. Morning customers typically consist of married men conducting business before their respectable employment. They seek quick, anonymous encounters prior to resuming their legitimate lives. Among these early visitors is William, a baker who has patronized this establishment for 3 years. Despite knowing himself to be diseased, having transmitted the French disease to at least 4 women, he shows no concern for Elizabeth's condition. He pays for what he terms complete service, demanding both vaginal and oral contact, despite Elizabeth's visible mouth lesions. Medieval customers understood perfectly well that they were spreading disease, but considered this entirely the women's responsibility. The prevailing attitude held that if you wished to avoid the pox, you should not be engaging in such commerce. William handles Elizabeth roughly, with obvious impatience and resentment at having to pay for what he desires. He channels his frustration through her body, treating her as an object designed solely for his convenience. When she involuntarily winces from pain, he commands her to remain silent and perform her function. The midday clientele often proved most dangerous. Men who had been consuming alcohol since morning, laborers venting their frustrations, and what the women categorized as rough trade. One such encounter involves 4 dock workers who have pooled their meager resources. They demand that Elizabeth accommodate all 4 men for the price typically paid by 2 customers. When she attempts to explain the established pricing structure, they threaten to report her to the bishop's officers for refusing paying customers. Elizabeth finds herself without recourse. The regulations explicitly state that no woman may refuse any customer capable of payment, and these men technically possess sufficient funds collectively. She is compelled to provide services to each man in succession, while the others observe and offer crude commentary regarding her pregnant condition.
By any moral standard, this constitutes rape. However, medieval law required rape victims to possess good reputation and free status. Winchester Geese qualified as neither, rendering rape legally impossible by definition. The afternoon brings what Elizabeth privately terms her gentlemen customers, men who at least maintain the pretense of treating her as human. Among her regular clients is Brother Thomas, a monk from Westminster Abbey. He visits twice weekly, consistently pays slightly above standard rates, and occasionally brings modest gifts such as bread or dried fruit. The irony proves staggering. A man who has taken solemn vows of chastity regularly pays for sexual contact with a pregnant teenager dying of the French disease. Brother Thomas has convinced himself this arrangement differs from ordinary sin. He believes he is providing charity by being among her more considerate customers. Brother Thomas requests what medieval sources termed the sodomite act, oral contact. This practice was extremely common because customers incorrectly believed it prevented disease transmission and did not technically constitute fornication in God's eyes. Elizabeth performs this service while actively coughing blood from the lung rot that now attacks her respiratory system alongside the French disease. At 6 in the evening, Elizabeth receives 30 minutes for sustenance and rest. Her meal consists of the same morning gruel, perhaps supplemented with a fragment of moldy cheese if business has been profitable. She utilizes this brief respite attempting more thorough cleansing, though facilities remain primitive, a shared bucket of cold water unchanged since dawn. Multiple women have used these same ablutions, including some with open wounds and active infections. Elizabeth observes that her unborn child has moved very little today. This marks her third pregnancy. Her first infant was stillborn, likely due to transmission of the French disease. The second survived 3 months before succumbing to what was probably congenital infection or malnutrition. She harbors terror that this pregnancy will end similarly, yet fears the alternative more acutely. Miscarriage would cost her days of income and result in unpayable debts.
Evening customers represent the greatest danger. These are men who have consumed alcohol throughout the day, workers seeking to vent their anger upon someone powerless, and what the women most feared, those who demanded what they called experiments. One such client is Marcus, a young nobleman who has heard that pregnant women provide different sensations. He pays double the standard rate, but demands Elizabeth assume positions that prove both painful and dangerous for someone in her condition. Marcus represents a particularly vile category of customer, men who specifically sought pregnant, diseased, or very young women because they found suffering sexually arousing. These were not accidents of desperate commerce, but deliberate cruelty. When Elizabeth demonstrates obvious pain, Marcus becomes more aggressive rather than less so. Pain constituted part of what he had purchased. Medieval literature contains numerous accounts of customers who preferred women in evident distress. Late-night patrons often proved most violent. These were men who had been drinking for hours, lost money gambling, or suffered rejection from other women. They arrived at brothels angry and seeking someone to dominate. Among the night's final customers is a group of university students celebrating a birthday. Loud, intoxicated, and aggressive, they demand Elizabeth participate in what they term games, essentially sexual torture disguised as entertainment. They force Elizabeth to consume alcohol, despite her condition making it medically dangerous. They compel her to dance despite obvious pain. They violate her in succession while others observe and cheer, treating the entire encounter as sporting entertainment. This ordeal continues for over 2 hours. Elizabeth earns perhaps 6 shillings total, barely sufficient to cover daily expenses, while enduring sexual and physical abuse from a dozen young men destined to become lawyers, physicians, and priests.
When the final customer departs at 2 in the morning, Elizabeth lies bleeding, bruised, and barely conscious. She has earned 14 pence, just enough to cover rent, meals, fines from the morning's health inspection, with 1 penny remaining. Tomorrow will demand identical repetition. She reclines upon her straw mattress, feeling her child's weak movements within her diseased body, attempting not to contemplate that 2 years of this existence have brought only deteriorating health. The French disease now attacks her brain, causing episodes of confusion and memory loss. The lung rot makes breathing increasingly difficult. Her body literally disintegrates, yet cessation of work means starvation. Elizabeth falls asleep to the sounds of other women in adjacent rooms servicing late customers, knowing she will be awakened again in 2 hours for the dawn shift.
This was every single day of her existence until death claimed her at 19 in 1514. Yet Elizabeth's daily torment was merely one component of a larger nightmare, for the diseases consuming these women reveal something even more disturbing about their systematic destruction.
The archaeological evidence from Crossbones Cemetery provides testimony more damning than any written record. When forensic experts examined the skeletal remains of women like Elizabeth, they discovered horrors that still disturb seasoned investigators. Elizabeth's bones tell a story medieval physicians attempted to conceal. Forensic analysis revealed that not a single bone in her body remained healthy. The French disease, what we now identify as syphilis, had systematically consumed her skeleton, creating coin-sized perforations in her skull. Her ribs displayed evidence of bacterial consumption of bone tissue from within. Her spine had twisted and deformed. Her facial bones had collapsed, producing the characteristic sunken appearance that made sufferers instantly recognizable. The skeletal evidence represents only partial testimony. Medieval accounts describe the living reality of the French disease's progression through 4 distinct stages. The initial stage began with small, painless lesions on the genitals. Most customers remained indifferent to these symptoms, having been informed they were merely occupational marks accompanying such work. The secondary stage brought full-body rash, fever, swollen lymph nodes, and suppurating sores covering mouth, hands, and genitalia. This was when Elizabeth would have incurred fines for working while diseased, yet been compelled to continue regardless.
The third stage witnessed apparent healing of surface symptoms, while the infection spread internally. Women appeared to recover, leading customers to believe they had become clean again. In reality, the disease was consuming their internal organs. The final stage brought neurological devastation, dementia, blindness, paralysis, and insanity. Medieval chronicles describe women who forgot their own names, failed to recognize regular customers, and sometimes wandered naked through streets because the disease had destroyed their minds. Most tragically, the French disease transmitted from mother to child. Elizabeth's infants were born with what medical texts called inherited corruption. Their bones twisted, organs failing, nervous systems damaged before birth. Archaeological evidence from Crossbones demonstrates that diseased mothers delivered infants with deformed skulls and facial bones, enlarged bellies from swollen organs, teeth that grew crooked and blackened, and shortened, twisted limbs. Most of these children died within months, though not quickly. They endured the same symptomatic progression as adults, compressed into their brief lives.
Medieval physicians termed gonorrhea the fire of Venus due to the excruciating pain it produced. Women described urination as passing liquid flame and intimate contact as being pierced with red-hot daggers. Unlike the French disease, gonorrhea symptoms appeared rapidly and proved impossible to conceal. Thick, putrid discharge that reeked of decay, burning agony during urination so severe women would scream, swollen, inflamed genitalia that made walking torturous, high fevers and violent chills. What makes this particularly evil is that customers could observe and smell gonorrhea symptoms, yet many remained indifferent. Some actively paid premiums for obviously infected women, believing diseased women possessed greater experience in the lustful arts. Medieval medical texts revealed that numerous customers specifically sought infected women because they believed disease indicated professional expertise. This was not ignorance, but deliberate cruelty. The long-term consequences proved devastating. Poisoning of the reproductive organs that made pregnancy agonizing, permanent barrenness from scarred tissue, chronic pain that never ceased, and joint corruption that made movement torturous. The overcrowded, poorly ventilated conditions in medieval brothels created perfect environments for lung rot, what we now call tuberculosis. Women shared beds, chambers, and eating vessels, ensuring the wasting disease spread rapidly throughout entire establishments. Elizabeth's ribs display classic tuberculosis indicators: thin, weakened bones riddled with small perforations where infection consumed bone tissue. The living experience proved far worse than skeletal evidence suggests. Constant, violent coughing that produced blood, extreme weight loss that rendered women skeletal, night sweats so severe they would awaken soaked in freezing chambers, chest pain that made breathing feel like drowning.
Customers complained that tubercular women appeared too emaciated and coughed excessively during service. Rather than receiving medical attention, these women simply incurred additional fines for disturbing customers with their illness. Medieval brothel records indicate that women with tuberculosis earned approximately 30% less than healthy women, creating a fatal spiral. Increasing sickness meant decreasing income, less food, and accelerated illness. Pregnancy, while diseased, created a category of horror that defies comprehension. Elizabeth endured 3 pregnancies, each representing a masterwork of medieval cruelty. Pregnant Winchester Geese faced continued sexual demands from customers who fetishized pregnant women, complete absence of prenatal care, malnutrition that weakened both mother and child, disease transmission that damaged developing infants, and birth complications without any medical assistance. Medieval customer accounts revealed that some men specifically preferred pregnant women because they believed expectant mothers were more grateful and tried harder to please. This created higher demand for pregnant women, forcing them to work despite obvious health risks. The births themselves occurred in the same chambers where sexual commerce took place, often with customers waiting outside. No medical assistance, no pain relief, no sanitary conditions. Many women died from complications that would be easily treatable today. Those who survived childbirth faced another nightmare, attempting to care for newborns while continuing their work. Infants were kept in identical rooms where sexual services occurred. Many died from disease exposure, inadequate nutrition, or simple neglect when mothers became too ill to provide care. Beyond physical ailments, these women suffered what we would now recognize as severe trauma-related mental illness. Medieval accounts describe women who ceased speaking entirely after months of abuse, developed what they called the shaking sickness, probably anxiety disorders, lost the ability to sleep, leading to hallucinations and paranoia, became violent toward customers or themselves, or simply lost their minds, a catch-all term for complete psychological breakdown. The combination of physical agony, sexual trauma, social isolation, and constant fear created mental health conditions that medieval society could neither understand nor treat. Women displaying signs of mental illness were often accused of demonic possession, leading to even worse treatment. Medieval treatments for these diseases frequently proved worse than the diseases themselves. Quicksilver treatments for the French disease caused brain damage and madness, burning out infected tissue with red-hot irons, bloodletting that further weakened already sick women, herbal potions prepared from toxic plants that often poisoned patients. The bishop's officers required diseased women to pay for these treatments from their own meager earnings. Women were thus forced to purchase medical torture that worsened their conditions while continuing to work to afford the treatments that were killing them. Yet even all of this suffering, the diseases, the agony, the systematic medical torture, was made possible by an institutional framework so hypocritical and brutal that it challenges belief. In 1161, King Henry II of England signed a remarkable document, one that granted Henry of Blois, Bishop of Winchester, legal authority to license and tax women engaged in sexual commerce. This was not clandestine activity, but official policy, complete with royal approval and detailed regulations. Henry of Blois emerged as simultaneously a holy man preaching divine virtue and England's most successful operator of commercial sexual exploitation. The scale of this operation was extraordinary. 18 licensed brothels operated within Southwark, over 1,000 women at peak capacity. Every individual paying licensing fees, rent, fines, and taxes directly to a man who wore ecclesiastical robes while delivering sermons about sexual purity. Consider the geography of medieval Southwark at dusk. Crossing London Bridge, the city's sole river crossing, one dodged horse manure and rotting refuse. The moment you entered Southwark, women called from doorways with carefully calculated marketing phrases designed to attract customers.
Fresh arrivals from the countryside, young and disease-free, experienced in the lustful arts. These were not random solicitations, but precisely calculated commercial tactics, as every interaction faced monitoring and regulation by the bishop's enforcement officers. The brothel establishments bore names that revealed their religious mockery: the cardinal's hat, the cross keys, the bishop's finger. Sacred symbols transformed into advertising for sexual services. The hypocrisy was literally painted upon building facades. What makes this truly horrifying is that the bishop did not merely permit this commerce, he optimized every aspect for maximum profit extraction from women's bodies. The licensing system was diabolically designed. Women could not simply begin working, they required official ecclesiastical permission. This cost money most desperate women did not possess, forcing them into immediate debt. Missing payments resulted in license revocation and illegal status. Continuing to work illegally meant imprisonment or worse.
Once licensed, the financial torture intensified systematically. Weekly rent for spaces barely large enough for a sleeping pallet, daily meal fees for bread and watery soup, clothing fees for mandatory uniforms that identified them as church property, medical fees for required weekly disease inspections, fine fees for dozens of potential rule violations. Elizabeth likely stood in the bishop's licensing queue in 1510, 16 years old, orphaned by plague, without family or alternatives. The clerk would have examined her like livestock, checking her teeth, inspecting her body for disease, then handed her a lead token that legally transformed her into ecclesiastical property. From that moment, Elizabeth belonged to the Bishop of Winchester. Her body, her earnings, her very survival depended entirely upon his regulations. The first rule prohibited working on Sundays or holy days. This sounds reasonable until one understands it was not mercy, but economics.
Church officials discovered that desperate women would pay higher rates for compressed work periods. Artificial scarcity drove up prices. The 14th rule stated that no woman shall entice any man by pulling upon his coat or clothing, with violation carrying a 20-shilling fine. 20 shillings exceeded what most people earned in 3 months. One desperate gesture born of hunger could create financial ruin.
The 23rd rule prohibited women from cursing, blaspheming, or calling upon God during their work, with violation carrying a 10-shilling fine. Imagine enduring physical pain and violent customers while being forbidden even to cry out to God for assistance. The most twisted regulation of all mandated that no woman shall refuse any customer who can pay, regardless of his condition, demands, or physical state. This meant Elizabeth could not refuse diseased men, could not reject violent customers, could not protect herself from men who wished to cause her harm. The bishop's rules literally compelled these women to accept anyone with money, regardless of danger. Through this system, the bishop became among England's wealthiest individuals. His palace in Southwark was a massive complex featuring gardens, private chapels, and golden altars, all funded by teenage girls selling their bodies in chambers so small one could barely recline. Every Sunday, this identical man stood in his cathedral wearing silk vestments purchased with Elizabeth's earnings, delivering sermons about the sanctity of the human soul and the evils of lustful desires.
His congregation would pray devoutly, while mere hundreds of yards away, young women like Elizabeth provided intimate services for payment in establishments under ecclesiastical ownership. The Church justified this arrangement through carefully constructed theological reasoning. St. Augustine had argued that removing such services would destabilize society through uncontrolled lustful behavior. Thomas Aquinas compared this commerce to essential but unpleasant municipal services, morally distasteful yet socially necessary. These women were regarded not as individuals offering services, but as instruments for channeling society's baser impulses away from respectable households. Medieval church doctrine classified this commerce as sinful yet unavoidable. Church authorities reasoned it was preferable for men to engage with women designated for such purposes rather than threaten legitimate marriages or turn to practices the Church considered more grievous sins. This theological framework provided perfect justification for the system's continuation. The Church could publicly condemn the moral transgression while privately collecting revenues from it. They could deliver sermons about spiritual purity while maintaining licensing authority over its violation. They could preserve their moral standing while operating what was effectively Europe's most extensive regulated intimate commerce network. The clientele represented every level of medieval society: merchants, craftsmen, university students, soldiers, and notably, members of the clergy themselves. Many were married men who rationalized their participation by claiming they were protecting their wives from unwelcome advances.
Medieval accounts describe customers arriving by boat after dark to avoid detection while crossing London Bridge. They would dock at Stew Lane, named for the brothels or stews that lined the waterfront. The term stew originally meant hot bath, but became synonymous with brothel because many establishments offered bathing services alongside sexual ones. The hypocrisy extended throughout society. The same men who drafted laws against adultery were regular customers. The same priests who preached sexual purity were paying for teenage women. The same nobles who claimed to protect women's honor were financing their systematic exploitation. The bishop's ordinances regulated every conceivable aspect of these women's existence: what they could wear. No aprons, apparently to distinguish them from respectable women. When they could work. Never on Sundays or holy days, because even sin needed to observe the Sabbath. How they could solicit. No pulling on clothing, no aggressive marketing of their services. Most revealing was what the bishop required of brothel owners: detailed financial records. Every transaction, every fee, every fine required documentation. While the church preached that money was the root of all evil, they certainly wanted their portion of that evil precisely calculated. This system generated enormous wealth for religious authorities. The Bishop of Winchester became one of England's richest ecclesiastical figures, constructing magnificent buildings throughout Southwark, surrounded by the very establishments that funded his lavish lifestyle. He could literally observe from his windows the source of his prosperity. The women who made this possible had a particular designation: Winchester Geese. The term goose was medieval slang for a woman in sexual commerce, while Winchester marked them as property of the bishop. They were not merely service providers, but branded assets in a religious business empire. Yet while the bishop accumulated wealth and customers satisfied their desires, the women who enabled everything were dying in numbers that shocked even medieval observers. And when death finally claimed them, the church that had profited from their suffering reserved one final insult.
When Elizabeth finally collapsed in her chamber at the Cardinal's Hat in 1514, aged 19, her death exposed the ultimate hypocrisy of the Winchester Geese system. The identical bishop who had collected taxes from her body for 4 years, who had fined her for being diseased while compelling her to continue working, who had grown wealthy from her suffering, now declared her unworthy of Christian burial. Medieval brothel records indicate that when Winchester Geese became too ill to work, they typically received 2 to 3 days to either recover or die. If they could not generate income, they faced eviction regardless of their condition. Elizabeth's final days were spent in what brothel owners termed the dying chamber, a space barely larger than a closet, where women unable to work were left to expire. No medical care, minimal sustenance, no visitors permitted. When a woman died, brothel owners had precisely 24 hours to remove the corpse before it became their financial responsibility. This created a ghoulish system where bodies were often removed while women remained technically alive but unconscious, essentially buried alive to avoid administrative complications.
The unconsecrated cemetery called Crossbones was not a graveyard in any conventional sense. It served as a dumping ground for human refuse, people the church considered too sinful for holy ground, yet too numerous to ignore entirely. Archaeological excavations in 1992 revealed the true horror of how these women were interred. Bodies were not buried individually, but thrown into pits, sometimes 20 to 30 women simultaneously, often while some remained dying. Excavations revealed skeletal remains literally entangled, arms, legs, and skulls mixed in arrangements suggesting bodies were simply discarded rather than placed. Despite death records mentioning coffins, archaeological evidence demonstrates most women were wrapped in whatever cloth proved cheapest, often merely old bed linens or grain sacks. The coffins referenced in records were probably wooden boards used to transport multiple corpses simultaneously. The most devastating discovery concerned infant remains. Dead children were often stuffed into identical graves as their mothers, sometimes forced into whatever space was available. Archaeologists discovered infant skeletons within adult pelvic cavities, babies who died during birth and were never removed from their mothers' bodies before burial.
Crossbones operated like a medieval refuse dump. New corpses were deposited atop old ones, creating layers of human remains. Archaeological excavation revealed bodies stacked 6 deep in some areas. 6 centuries of women disposed of like waste. Many skeletons displayed evidence of burial while decomposition was already advanced, suggesting corpses were left exposed for days or weeks before disposal. Some remains showed evidence of animal predation. Rats, dogs, and birds had fed upon bodies before burial. The most sickening discovery emerged from medieval church records preserved in Winchester Cathedral archives. The Bishop of Winchester maintained detailed financial accounts of Crossbones operations, treating human disposal as routine business expense. Disposal fee per corpse, 2 pence. Grave excavation, 1 shilling per 20 bodies. Lime for disease control, 3 pence monthly. Guard wages to prevent corpse theft, 5 shillings quarterly. Guards were necessary because people stole bodies from Crossbones. Not for medical research. Corpses possessed commercial value. Hair could be sold to wig makers, teeth to dental practitioners, clothing to rag merchants. Even in death, these women remained commodities for exploitation.
During plague outbreaks, Crossbones became a horror beyond description. Bodies arrived faster than burial capacity allowed, creating mounds of rotting flesh that bred disease and attracted scavengers. Medieval accounts describe Crossbones during plague years as a mountain of putrefying meat that could be detected across the Thames. City officials repeatedly ordered site cleanup, not from respect for the deceased, but because the stench affected property values in adjacent areas. Perhaps most heartbreaking was that Winchester Geese often buried each other. When a woman died, her roommates or fellow workers were expected to transport the corpse to Crossbones and excavate the grave themselves. Imagine Elizabeth, dying of the French disease and lung rot, carrying her 16-year-old roommate's body to Crossbones, digging a shallow grave with her diseased hands, knowing she would occupy the same hole within months. These women buried their friends, their roommates, their sisters in exploitation, understanding they witnessed their own futures. The psychological trauma of this system extended beyond death itself. While Winchester Geese were being discarded in mass graves, the Bishop of Winchester constructed increasingly elaborate monuments to himself. His tomb in Winchester Cathedral, funded by revenues from sexual exploitation, features gold leaf, precious stones, and religious imagery celebrating his holy life.
The inscription reads, "Here lies Henry of Blois, servant of God, protector of the innocent, defender of the poor." This man, who accumulated wealth from teenage women dying of disease, memorialized himself as a protector of innocence. The hypocrisy is so complete it resembles satire, yet it remains carved in stone to this day. For centuries after the Winchester Geese system ended, the Church actively attempted to erase evidence of Crossbones. Maps were redrawn to exclude it. Historical records were lost or destroyed. The site was repeatedly built over to prevent excavation. When construction workers accidentally discovered bones in 1992, church officials initially attempted to halt archaeological investigation, claiming the site was too disturbing for public knowledge. Only pressure from historians and local residents forced the complete excavation that revealed the truth. The Winchester Geese system finally terminated in 1546 when King Henry VIII ordered closure of all licensed brothels in Southwark. This was not moral reform, but political expedience. Henry was seizing church property and desired the bishop's profitable brothel revenues for royal coffers.
The women were not liberated. They were simply criminalized. Most scattered throughout London, working under more dangerous conditions without even the minimal protections the bishop's system had provided. Elizabeth had died 32 years before Henry's decree, but thousands like her suffered identical fates: starving, sick, abandoned by the system that had exploited them, denied even the meager wages they had previously earned. Crossbones continued accumulating corpses for another 3 centuries. Different women, identical stories. Used, discarded, forgotten. The cemetery finally closed in 1853, not because society developed greater morality, but because it was completely overcharged with the dead. Too many corpses, insufficient space. Today, Crossbones exists as a memorial garden maintained by local volunteers. The gates display ribbons, flowers, and small plaques honoring the outcast dead. Monthly gatherings remember the Winchester Geese. Yet even now, the Church of England has never officially apologized for the Winchester Geese system, never acknowledged the suffering they caused, never accepted responsibility for 4 centuries of systematic exploitation and abuse. Elizabeth's name appears carved on the Crossbones Memorial, finally honored after 5 centuries of being forgotten. She represents thousands of women whose names we shall never know, whose stories died with them, whose suffering funded a religious empire built upon their bones.
The Winchester Geese system operated for 385 years, longer than American slavery, longer than the Third Reich, longer than most nations have existed. For nearly 4 centuries, England's most powerful religious institution maintained a systematic program of sexual exploitation that consumed thousands of women and children. Elizabeth's story, awakening to strangers, violating her diseased body, servicing violent customers while pregnant, dying at 19 with her bones consumed by the French disease, was not exceptional. It was typical. This occurred to thousands of women with official approval, legal protection, and religious blessing. The men who created and maintained this system were not monsters lurking in shadows. They were bishops, kings, priests, and respectable citizens who convinced themselves that some people's suffering was acceptable for others' profit. The Crossbones Memorial reminds us today that behind every system of exploitation exist real people who suffer real consequences. Elizabeth was more than a victim. She was a teenager who attempted to survive impossible circumstances with courage we can barely comprehend. The Winchester Geese teach us that societies are capable of extraordinary cruelty when they decide some people matter less than others. They also demonstrate that no matter how completely a system attempts to erase someone's humanity, truth eventually surfaces. We remember Elizabeth and the Winchester Geese not to sensationalize their suffering,
but to honor their humanity and learn from their experience. Because the price of forgetting is repeating their tragedy.